Darren reached across the table with that practiced smile of his, the one that had charmed teachers, girlfriends, and investors alike. "Hey, Mom, just a quick form. Nothing serious. Just needs your signature." He slid the page toward me with one hand, but I noticed the other hand dipping below the table. I didn't blink. I didn't ask. I let the lasagna grow cold on my plate while I watched him slip a second document underneath the first. I'd seen enough forged contracts in my years handling estates to know what a fake looked like. He'd gotten lazy with it. The loops of the Y in my last name too stiff, the spacing off, the pen ink wrong tone. He didn't even try to mask the swap. He really believed I wouldn't notice. So I smiled. I took the top page, flipped it over neatly, and pretended to read. "Remind me what this is for again?" I asked. "Just a minor authorization," Darren said smoothly. "Something to keep things in order for tax season." I nodded slowly and passed it back. "Leave it here. I'll review it after dinner." He hesitated. Just a flicker. Then the grin returned. "Sure, of course." Bianca, his wife, raised her wine glass across the table. "To family and a fresh financial start." I lifted mine, too. "To clear boundaries," I said, and took a slow sip. They had no idea. The trust fund they were trying to breach emptied, reallocated, guarded. I'd pulled every dollar out yesterday and triggered the red alert protocol with my lawyer just as we'd rehearsed. At that very moment, any attempt to access the original accounts would set off a string of digital pings, one to the bank, one to Mr. Givens, and one just for me. My phone buzzed gently in my sweater pocket. I didn't even glance at it. I just kept smiling, watching my son reach for something that was already gone. There was a time Darren used to kiss my cheek before school and say, "Thanks for working so hard, Mom." That was before he understood what money really meant. Before the gap between us widened not just in age, but in value. After Martin died, I didn't have time to grieve. Grief didn't pay tuition or put dinner on the table. I picked up a second job the week after the funeral, weekend receptionist at a local clinic. By the next month, I was tutoring evenings too. 3 jobs, no vacations, no help. Just a tired woman pushing grocery carts at midnight and folding laundry at dawn. Every dime went to Darren. Private school because the public one was falling apart. SAT prep classes because he had a future I refused to let rust. When he got into Columbia, I cried in the parking lot of my 3rd shift. He never knew I sold my wedding ring to help cover his textbooks. I remember wiring the down payment for his first house. He didn't ask, but he let me offer. Said it would be temporary. I told him to pay it forward someday. He nodded, distracted already looking at marble countertops online. When he married Bianca, I paid for the honeymoon 7 nights in Maui. I remember the thank you card she sent. It was signed with gratitude, but the ink was smudged. I kept it anyway. I never remarried. Never thought about it much. My heart was wrapped in raising a boy into a man. That was enough for me. But something changed the year Darren started making more than I did. Phone calls got shorter. Updates turned into bullet points. I was no longer the woman who held the world together. I was the woman who didn't get it. At holidays, they talked investments and tech startups while I refilled the mashed potatoes. I stopped bringing homemade bread after Bianca whispered it was a bit too rustic for their spread. It hit me hardest when Darren said, "You're lucky you don't have to worry about real work anymore." That was when I realized he didn't see me as strong. He saw me as dispensable. It started small. Most betrayals do. Darren stopped calling, just to talk. Every conversation turned into a question about money. "So, how much do you still have from Dad's life insurance? You ever think about consolidating your accounts? Need help managing your portfolio, Mom?" Each time I laughed it off, changed the subject. But I wrote the questions down in a little blue notebook I kept tucked inside my pantry behind the flour. Bianca dropped by more than usual. Always smiling, always breezy. We should help you sort out your paperwork sometime, Malis. You've got so much stuff. Wouldn't it be easier to just sign a few forms and let Darren handle things for you? I told her I liked doing things myself. She giggled. Oh, I'm sure. But at some point, don't you want to relax? Just hand it off and enjoy your days. Then one morning, I noticed the office drawer ajar, the one where I kept the key copy to my fireproof box. I remembered locking it. I always locked it. But now it clicked open with no resistance. The copy key was gone. I didn't say a word. I started scanning all my documents, keeping backups on a flash drive I wore around my neck like a pendant. I changed my passwords. I moved my most sensitive paperwork into a safety deposit box at the credit union. Then came the call that sealed everything. Mrs. Hallen, this is Ryan. Ryan Trask. I was in your 12th grade civics class. I remembered him. Sharp, kind eyes. Good handwriting. I'm a financial officer now, he said. You didn't hear this from me, but someone tried to authorize a change on your trust. Something felt off. So I held it. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. Thank you, Ryan. You did the right thing. That night, I called Mr. Givens, an estate lawyer I'd met once at a church seminar. We built the red alert system together. Every document, every transfer, every alert tied to my fingerprint and voice, because I wasn't going to wait to be stolen from. Not again. I was 48 when Aunt Delphine passed. We hadn't been close in the traditional sense she was. Quiet, lived alone, rarely traveled outside her little greenhouse in Montana. But we wrote each other letters every month for 20 years. She believed in hard work, independence, and keeping your affairs in order. Her will reflected that. When the lawyer called, I thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. Aunt Delphine had left me a modest inheritance, more than I'd ever dreamed of seeing in one place. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to breathe easier. Enough to build something. The first thing I did was meet with a financial planner. We set up a trust structured, protected, and quiet. The trust required 2 forms of authorization for any major withdrawals. Any attempt to access the account without biometric ID would trigger fraud alerts. And if anything ever seemed off the red alert protocol Mr. Givens helped me design, would lock the entire system down. I told no one. Not Darren. Not Bianca. Not even my closest friend at the senior center. I didn't want admiration. I wanted security. Not the kind that comes from money, but the kind that lets you sleep at night. Over the years, I used the interest quietly. I funded local scholarships under anonymous names. I helped open 2 free clinics in nearby counties. I donated to small shelters that didn't have big marketing campaigns. I made sure none of the gifts could be traced back to me. The rest I left untouched. A buffer. A future. A place to land should the world around me shift. Darren never asked how I managed even after I stopped working. He assumed I lived off Social Security and savings. That suited me fine. Because I knew if he sensed what I really had, it wouldn't be long before he believed it was his. And that belief, that quiet entitlement, was far more dangerous than any thief. I never expected him to love me for the money, but I never thought he'd try to take it from me while smiling across a dinner table. 2 weeks before the dinner, I was watering the basil by the kitchen window when I heard Bianca's voice carry down the hallway. She was on the phone loud enough to forget I was home, soft enough to think I wouldn't hear. She doesn't need all that money, she said with a half laugh. She's almost 70. Darren's the one who should be managing it now. My hands paused over the sink. The faucet ran unnoticed. There was a long silence then. No, she hasn't said anything yet. She's still independent. But if we time it right, we could handle everything before the quarter ends. Trust me. Darren's working on it. She ended the call before I could move. The next morning, Bianca appeared in the kitchen with 2 coffees, and a too sweet smile. "Thought I'd stop by," she said casually, handing me a mug. "We were thinking, it might be helpful if I helped you organize your accounts. You know, tax season and all." I sipped slowly and smiled. "That's kind of you, but I've already got someone for that." She didn't press, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the kind of flicker people get when their plan hits a snag. Later that week, I came by Darren's office unannounced to drop off a binder he'd left behind. He wasn't there, but his printer was still warm. I glanced at the tray and saw legal forms, account authorizations. My name misspelled slightly on the signature line. One of the forms listed the same trust bank I'd used. That night, I called Mr. Givens. We didn't need to guess anymore. We needed to confirm. Together, we set up a decoy trust, identical in name but empty, except for a single dollar and a web of alerts. Anyone who tried to touch it would trip the system. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go while thinking I was blind. And that's how I walked into that dinner with a calm smile, knowing exactly what was waiting on the table. Bianca had made roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and a citrus salad. Everything plated just right, like a dinner party out of a lifestyle magazine. Darren poured the wine white for her, red for me, talking about how family time had been too rare lately. I smiled and nodded, bit into the chicken, told Bianca it was lovely. Everything about the evening felt staged. The way Darren laughed too loud at Bianca's jokes, the way she kept glancing at the kitchen clock, the wine refills that came a little too quickly, like they wanted me comfortable, compliant. I played my part. The grateful mother, the quiet elder. Halfway through dessert, Darren excused himself. "I just remembered," he said, standing. "I brought something. We've been meaning to go over some documents. Nothing urgent, just thought tonight might be a good time." He disappeared down the hall. Bianca gave me a tight smile. When he returned, there was a manila folder in his hands. I took another sip of wine and let him open it between us on the coffee table. "Just a quick review," he said. "We figured you'd want everything in one place for tax season. On the first page, my name, the second, my signature. Only it wasn't. The curve of the M was wrong. The loop in the L barely closed. A copy of a copy, just enough to fool a bank officer who wasn't looking too closely." I leaned in, feigning confusion. "Mind if I turn on the lamp? I nearly forgot," I said, pushing back my chair. "Dessert." Bianca started to rise. "Oh, I can get it." "No need," I said gently, already heading toward the door. "I left it in the fridge, out in the car." They both nodded, thinking nothing of it. I stepped outside into the cool night air, walked down the short path to the driveway, and opened the back door of my car. Inside was the tote bag I'd packed hours before, neatly zipped, heavier than it looked. I reached in and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. A printed thread of Bianca's emails, asking to streamline Melis's finances for efficiency. Screenshots of Darren's login attempt from 2 nights ago, captured by the decoy system. A modified version of my will downloaded from a cheap legal template site. My name typed in the signatures, blank. I had everything. Every step they'd taken documented. Not because I wanted this, but because I knew them better than they thought. I zipped the bag shut and slung it over my shoulder pie box, balanced in my other hand. Then I walked back into the house as if nothing had changed. Bianca looked relieved when I reappeared. Darren was mid-sentence, something about travel plans. I set the pie down, retrieved the plates, and began slicing. Then buzz. My phone again. I glanced at the screen, smiled quietly, and turned it toward them. Unauthorized access detected. Trust account flagged. The bank's fraud alert sat in bold red, time-stamped to the minute. Darren went pale. Bianca dropped her fork. "What is that?" Darren asked, his voice too flat to sound casual. "A notification," I said, settling into my chair. "It's from the trust account." the one someone tried to access just now. Bianca opened her mouth, then shut it again. I poured another cup of coffee, calm as ever. I think I said slowly, "We should talk about honesty now that the pie's on the table." "It was just to help manage things," Bianca said quickly, her voice trembling as she reached for a napkin. Darren sat, rigid jaw clenched. "I didn't think you'd notice." I said nothing. "We were going to tell you eventually." Bianca added, her voice soft, like I was the one being unreasonable. I sipped my coffee. Warm, steady, undisturbed. The pie sat between us untouched now. The sweet scent clashed with the sharpness in the air. I let the silence stretch, not because I didn't have words, but because they weren't worth spending on people who'd already decided I was disposable. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim, white envelope. No rush, no ceremony, just a simple slide across the table right between the wine glasses and the silverware. Darren frowned. "What's this?" "Your copy," I said, calmly. He opened it. Bianca leaned in. Her eyes flicked over the first line, and then froze. It was a formal notice from my attorney. Effective immediately, Darren and Bianca were barred from accessing or making decisions regarding any of my financial assets. Their names had been removed from all contingent roles. Any prior permissions had been revoked. They both looked up. Their mouths opened, then closed. I stood, took my plate to the sink, rinsed it, dried it. "I won't be needing dessert tonight," I said gently, walking toward the door. Neither of them followed. At the entryway, I slipped on my coat, buttoned it slowly, and let the weight of the room sink behind me. No slamming doors, no shouting, just the soft click of my shoes as I walked to the car. And when I pulled away from the curb, the last thing I saw through the window was Darren still holding the letter, like it might change if he stared long enough, but it wouldn't. Some things stay permanent once you stop asking for respect and start demanding peace. Weeks passed. The first envelope came with Darren's handwriting shaky and rushed as if guilt had finally found a pen. Inside was a letter full of pleas, regrets, and a not-so-subtle request to correct the paperwork so we can put this behind us. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer, who replied with a brief chuckle and then a more formal update. Darren and Bianca had filed a challenge against the trust. It didn't last 10 minutes in court. The judge barely looked up from the documents before ruling. The trust was airtight, notarized, signed, witnessed, and registered months in advance. Every safeguard Delphine, my aunt, and I had put in place had held. Darren's challenge was dismissed, with prejudice. I changed my number that evening. Bianca tried a different approach, emails, voicemails from unknown numbers, even a bouquet of lilies sent to my mailbox with a card that read, "Let's start fresh." I left them at the curb. That night, I slept with the windows open, the air crisp and clean. No phone buzzing on the nightstand, no anxious clock watching, no knots in my chest wondering who might try to twist kindness into obligation again. Instead, I woke to birds and sunlight and the quiet hum of nothing needing my attention. It wasn't just silence. It was peace. And in that stillness, something shifted. I found myself opening the windows more, watering the porch plants, updating my living trust not to block anyone, but to name the scholarships I would support, the local shelter I'd quietly funded for years, and the financial literacy group I'd once only dreamed of starting. This time, it wasn't about protecting what I had. It was about giving without being taken from. And just as I folded the final document into its envelope, another letter slid through the mail slot. No return address, but I recognized the penmanship. Darren again. But this time, I didn't even open it. I picked up the letter, walked to the fireplace, and let it burn. I sold the house in early spring. No big announcement, no farewell dinner, just a quiet listing, a firm offer, and a signature that for once was entirely mine. I packed what mattered, donated what didn't, and left behind the echo of years that no longer felt like home. The coastal town I chose wasn't flashy. It didn't have luxury condos or wine bars with velvet chairs, but it had something else: salt air seagulls and a public library that still smelled like paper. I introduced myself to the head librarian on my second visit. By the end of the week, I'd funded a new literacy wing in Aunt Pamela's name. She would have liked that her legacy tucked not behind lawyers and locked accounts, but between shelves and whispered stories. The cat came next. A gray tabby with lopsided ears and eyes like she'd already seen everything. I named her Juno after the goddess who protects women. Juno follows me from room to room, but never begs. She curls at my feet while I write donation checks or mark up foundation plans in red ink. She reminds me what stillness without sadness feels like. Most mornings I have coffee with two women I met at the bookstore: Eliza, a retired geologist, and Frankie, a part-time poet, who insists on reading us her drafts, whether we ask or not. We laugh. We share old wounds, new goals. No one asks for anything they wouldn't give back. This is what building looks like, not repairing, but beginning again. I raised a son, I told them once, setting down my mug. But I'm building something better now. They understood without asking. Last week, another letter arrived, no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Darren again. I didn't even pause. I walked it to the kitchen bin, tucked it beneath yesterday's paper, and pressed the lid closed. That night, I made a list of the scholarships we'd fund next year. I titled it Miley's and Pamela Foundation, Phase 2. And in the morning, Juno followed me to the porch. We watched the sun rise over the sea,